Rain pelted the cracked sidewalks, mixing with the neon glare of a flickering street lamp. A man shivered beneath a tattered coat, clutching a plastic bag of what little he owned. The paramedic who drove past didn't even glance his way. "Next time," he muttered to himself, ignoring the plea for help. Little did he know, this small act of negligence would echo far beyond the night in a way he would never forget. Take a moment right now to like this video, comment, share it with others, and subscribe to Moral Avenue. If this story shocks you, stay with us. The truth is about to hit harder than the rain on that street. Ethan Miles was the kind of man who prided himself on being efficient, a dedicated paramedic in a bustling city. He was used to emergencies, to pain, to the chaos that came with life and death situations. But lately, something has changed. The long shifts, the thankless calls, and the constant pressure had hardened him. Compassion had begun to feel like a luxury he couldn't afford. That evening, the city was alive with noise, car horns, distant sirens, muffled arguments. Yet on one corner, an old man trembled, his breath fogging the cold air. This man, homeless and fragile, had fallen down, clutching his chest, gasping for air. Ethan drove past in his ambulance, headphones in, focused on the next real emergency. To him, the man was invisible, just another shadow in the night. But shadows often hide truths we aren't ready to see. The next morning, Ethan arrived at the station, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling that had settled over him. His colleague, Maria, glanced at him, noticing his distracted stare. "You okay, Ethan?" she asked, handing him a cup of lukewarm coffee. "Fine," he replied, forcing a grin, but inside, a quiet doubt gnawed at him. He couldn't explain why the sight of that man, shivering in the rain, lingered in his mind. Meanwhile, across the city, that same man who had tried so desperately to reach for help had been admitted to the hospital hours too late. The negligence had consequences. News reports were subtle at first. Unidentified man dies in alley. Circumstances under investigation. But the story would grow louder, and the truth would claw its way to Ethan's door. Days later, Ethan received a call from dispatch. A code blue, someone critical in his own neighborhood. Racing through wet streets, he arrived at a small, modest apartment building, unaware that inside was a man gasping for air, turning blue, barely conscious. As he lifted the patient's blanket to assess him, the world seemed to tilt. The man's face pale, strain was hauntingly familiar. Heart racing. Ethan's eyes widened. The blood drained from his face. "Jake?" he whispered, almost too quietly to hear. It was his brother. Years ago, Jake had fallen on hard times. A string of bad luck, layoffs, and personal failures had led him to life on the streets. Ethan had always considered himself responsible, trying to help where he could. But the long shifts and mounting frustrations had created a barrier he never thought he'd cross. And that night, he had ignored Jake's desperate plea, unaware of who was truly in need. As Ethan fought to stabilize him, guilt and fear collided in a storm of regret. He recalled every instance he had justified indifference, every time he had dismissed someone because he assumed their pain wasn't urgent. The realization struck him harder than any physical blow. Life has a way of circling back. Paramedics arrived to assist, and the rush of medical protocols began. Ethan's hands trembled, but he refused to let in despair. The irony was unbearable. The very brother he had failed to save before, the brother he had overlooked in the cold, depended on him now, and he couldn't afford another mistake. The moral of that night became painfully clear. Neglect, even when seemingly small, can ripple into unimaginable consequences. After hours of intense intervention, Jake's heart stabilized. Ethan sat by his side, holding his brother's hand, tears streaming down his face. The city outside continued its indifferent rhythm, but inside that tiny hospital room, a profound lesson unfolded. He realized that compassion could never be postponed, and kindness could never be rationed. One small act of empathy could save a life. One act of neglect could cost it. And often, the person most in need is closer than you think. Perhaps even someone you love. As the night deepened, Ethan promised himself he would never let bureaucracy or fatigue blind him to human suffering again. But the story was far from over. A nurse whispered something that made his blood run cold. There's more. The man who called last week the one on the corner? He wasn't alone. Someone saw everything. Ethan froze. Who else had been there that night? And what would they do with what they saw? The unanswered question hung heavy, like a storm cloud ready to burst, leaving the audience on edge, waiting for part 2. Moral: never judge or ignore someone in need. Kindness always comes back. If this story shook you, please take a moment to like this video, share it with friends, subscribe to Moral Avenue, and leave a comment below. Your support helps us continue spreading stories that inspire and heal. Before we end, I have one special request. Comment below what you would have done if you were Ethan at that moment. Thank you for watching Moral Avenue.